is LaMont Hamilton, and I'm an artist. And the piece that this interview is centered around is To Hear the Earth Before the End of the World. I have to start off to say that that is a riff off of Ed Roberson's title, To See the Earth Before the End of the World, which is the book he produced about 10 years ago at this point. It also was influenced by, I'm going to fully butcher his name, but a Brazilian poet, Vieira Goulart. He has a long poem called Barulhos, which translates to noise. The kind of through line is this lament of, he was raised in the countryside and moved to the city, and he was lamenting of the sounds that he was missing from the countryside and how the city was just full of noise, kind of fearing that those sounds that he understood growing up were no longer going to be. They were becoming extinct. And I think that kind of became the driving force of why sound became the thing for this. So that's kind of where it all started. The field recordings, in this case, are more or less secondary to the idea. They became a thing that I needed to do based on Goulart's, kind of lament of these extinct sounds. So then the impulse was to do as many field recordings as I could and go to different places to do those. And so Alaska, I had already recordings in Brazil. I had residencies in France and Italy. And so I would take my field recording set up there to do these recordings. And I would just find different elements that I could record. Mostly it was like the sea or forest or birds, or whatever it was. I didn't really have a full direction of what it was I was trying to get. That came a little later, but it was just about compiling as much material as I could so I can work with it later. The field recordings themselves became a meditation. It wasn't something I really thought about or even thought about how they were going to fit into things. My ears were just wide open. And whenever natural sonic experiences would come about, I would have my microphones ready. I wanted to hear sounds, nature, in a way that I couldn't fully hear it with my ears, because microphones are far more sensitive than our ears, and you can be far more directional, for instance, with like a shotgun mic or something like that. So it opened up a whole new palette of hearing, which then my ears became acclimated to. The piece became a lot of lingering with the sounds that were all around. Our changing globe, which is always changing, is part of the subject matter, but it's not the point. The point of the piece is really the meditation that I started to fall into in doing these recordings. That became the driving force. I became really interested in what's happening to us sonically, as opposed to things that we can see, because I think that's a far more interesting and not as well covered element of our changing world, because it sounds completely different than it does 100 years ago, and that's a fact. But how does it sound different? Why does it sound different? These are really pertinent questions. The 5 elements are earth, air, water, fire, and ether. Ether being the 5th element, and I was very adamant about having that part of it as well, because I look at ether as being, for instance, the mother of all elements. Some line of thoughts think of ether as a nothingness. Some think of ether as all these other different things. But I think of it as a kind of a fecund place, a fecund element that all the other elements are birthed out of in some way, shape, or form. So that was a challenge. Obviously, there's no field recordings of ether. You can't record that. But it lends a lot to the imagination. I say it all the time that this piece favors the patient. With art nowadays, we don't give it time. We'll give a movie time, we'll give a book time sometimes, but we don't really give experience in art that much time, especially if there's nothing driving it. For instance, this piece has no definitive rhythm, has no definitive time signature. There is a very specific flow, but it might not be immediately understood in first listening because the piece themselves, not all of them, but in general, they have 2 movements in a coda. Some of them have 3. And wherever you come in, if you stay with it long enough, you're going to hear that distinct movement and then the opening of another movement. But like I said, I think it favors the patient and favors those who are willing to sit with it and be within themselves inside of it. My choice of using just color instead of images is one, my growing disdain for images. We live in such an image-based culture now, world really, and we're bombarded with images in all these different ways, and it just becomes too much. But I understand too, in order to sit with it, it needed something to kind of glue it together or hold people's attention. So that's where the color fills kind of came in. I think that the idea was to use light, to use color in order to orient people within what's happening within the sounds and to create kind of a synesthetic environment, because I think that drives the art experience home further when all of our senses are engaging within it. Part of Ed's title, which is to see the earth before the end of the world, and in my title, to hear the earth before the end of the world, it orients you into the now because it creates an imperative of 2 things. One, what is the end of the world, and 2, how much is the earth diminishing and how much of the experience of the earth is diminishing, which creates the imperative to hear or to see it before the end of the world. There's a distinction between the earth and the world. There's many worlds. There's millions of worlds actually. You have your own world and I have my own, mine. But there's only one earth that we live on, and it's going to be here. It was here before us, and it's going to be here after us. I look at this piece as more or less an open question, not something trying to answer anything. One, it's a question in one's imagination, whatever flows through as you're experiencing a piece. And like I just said within the title, there's these questions that one can kind of parse out. And it's more or less about one being present, because I hope that when people leave this exhibition, they don't want to go grab a book. They want to go out and experience the sonic world around them for themselves, When we talk about this earth that we live in, I don't think that it's the time for grief. If anything, there's a time to fight, There's still a lot that can be done. And if we're wasting our time grieving, then nothing's getting done and we're just going to have more to grieve about. Nothing I've ever done has thought about a lament in that way. And even the title that sounds like a lament is actually not. It's a call to action. If anything, to hear the earth before the end of the world means go out and hear it. You know, you need to experience it. You need to be present within it. And Ed's title, to see the earth before the end of the world, is a call to action to go do so. And I think that's the power of art. You know, there has to be space in art where folks can use it as, in a sense, a call to action.